Hello everyone. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to implement a waitlist for your business or startup. By the end of this tutorial, we're going to have a custom waitlist form where users will be able to sign up, verify their email, get approved, and authenticated. This will come with email verification, authentication, email notifications, and a custom profile page. We will achieve all of this using Descope flows and Airtable. And within Descope flows, we're going to explore the concept of connectors, which will allow us to make requests to third-party services within our flows. Without further ado, let's get building. By the end of this tutorial, you're going to have a waitlist that looks like the following. On the left side, we have your company logo or icon, and on the right side, we actually have our Descope flow and form. So let's input an email address and let's see how it works. Sweet. Now it says awaiting approval. Please wait until we approve you to log in. Okay, cool. And if you go to our Airtable, we can see that my email has been added and I'm now awaiting approval. So let's approve myself. Okay, go back, reload, and let's try it again. Sweet. Now we're directed to our profile page and I can log out. Before we continue any further, I'll ask that you go to github.com/descope-sample-app/waitlist-sample-app, and in this repository you're going to find all the code for this entire project. Go through the README, clone the repo, set up your Airtable, and deploy to Vercel, and then let's start building our flow and planning it all out. Okay, so we're going to first start by going to our Descope console at app.descope.com, and then so I have a project set up called Waitlist app, and let's create a new flow. And we can name this waitlist. And then description, we can also add like waitlist. So let's create. Sweet. Okay, so now we'll see our start and our end. Let's zoom out, spread it a bit more out. And so let's start from the beginning. To start, let's add our form screen. Every waitlist needs a form of some sort, a screen of some sort, with an email input and a button. So let's add that. So we can click this plus icon here, click on screen, and then let's add an email input. We can remove this body here. Let's also add a button. Let's do fill container, because I think that would look a bit nicer. And then to finish it off, let's name our screen for organization to waitlist screen. Click done. Okay, sweet. So our screen has been created, and now we can just connect it. Now that our waitlist screen is complete, now let's sign the user up to verify their email. To do so, we can go back to this plus icon here, and now select an action. And then let's select sign up or in with OTP/email. And then let's connect the waitlist screen to the sign up or in. Done. Before we continue on, let's think about the next steps. So after this step right here, after the user has been verified, their email has been verified, there's 3 different scenarios that this can branch out into. One is that the user does not exist in our Airtable and needs to be added. Then we show some screen saying awaiting approval. The second scenario is if the user exists in the Airtable but still needs approval, so it needs to wait still. And then the last scenario is when the user is in the Airtable and is approved. Those are the 3 different scenarios. Okay, so the next step is to determine the 3 different scenarios. So how can we do that? Well, we've cloned the repo, the waitlist sample app, and let's go to our API index.js file. Here we'll find all our API endpoints. So let's quickly go over them. So first we have our get Airtable by email function, which is just a helper function. And you can see that it goes through your Airtable base. Mine's named registration. And it just filters by formula email. So it just filters by the email. So for example, if my email was bob@gmail.com, it filters through my Airtable for that email and then get that piece of data. And we can see that we just return the data at the end of this function. Pretty simple. Okay, next we have app.get. This is now our actual API endpoint. And if you go to your deployed Vercel website URL and you do /API/check-user/ and then you replace this part with your email, then it'll go to the rest of this code here. So it'll say const user form email. It gets the email from your parameters. And then the data here, we get the data using the helper function here, which gets our Airtable record. And then in this if statement, we say, if the data is empty or does not exist, then we return is approved add. So in this scenario, if our get Airtable data is empty, that means the user does not exist in our Airtable. So we must add them. Okay. Next, we get the data email field, and then this variable, we get the data approved field. And then we say if the Airtable email matches the email parameter and the user is approved, then we say is approved is true. We return this is approved true object. Okay, and lastly, the last scenario is when the user does exist in an Airtable but isn't approved. So we just say is approved false. And then the last endpoint is the add user. So now we actually want to add the user in this case, and we have an API endpoint for that. So again, we get the email from the parameter, and then we go through our registration. We create a record. We create it with the email, with the user form email. We set the approved to false because we don't want to pre-approve someone. So let's use our API endpoints by implementing connectors in our flow. So just to recall, connectors allow us to make requests to third-party services within our flows. So we can make requests to a server or an API. In this case, our API here. So let's go back to our flows and then implement a connector in our flow. So back in our flow builder, on the left navigation, you can see something here called connectors. So click on that, and you can see a number of options you can implement. But for this, let's just implement a generic HTTP right here. Okay, let's name it. So the purpose of this thing is to check the user, right? This essentially accounts for all three scenarios. So let's target this API endpoint here. Let's call this. So currently, I have my application already deployed to waitlist sampleapp.preview.descope.org. So let's now call our check user API endpoint. So going back to the Descope console, back to our connector, we can name this, for example, check user. For the base URL, this is the base URL to fetch. So that would be where your deployed Vercel application is, which is this. And then let's also add the rest of it, right? The /API/check user. Not the email part, we'll get to that later. So this will be our base URL. Authentication type, we don't have any authentication for this, so let's select none. And what's cool is that we can test this. Well, it says failed, didn't get anything because I didn't add a field, but let's say we do this, eric@descope.com, let's check this user. We get is approved add, because looking at our Airtable, there's nothing inside of it. So what's cool about connectors is that we can also test the GET requests in here. And then let's actually remove that. And then let's click create because we know it works now. So you can see here that our check user connector is right here, but not in use. So let's use it in our flows. So our waitlist. So let's space it out. And then let's add our connector. Click the plus icon, connector, generic HTTP GET because it's a GET request. And then you can see it already has it here. The base URL is the deployed Vercel link with the /API/check user. And for the API endpoint, we want to get our email, right? Where's our email? Our email is currently within our flow, right? Our waitlist screen passes our email down to the sign up button here. And so we want to capture that email. So we can do that by using double braces. And then you can say user dot, and then you can see a bunch of options here. You want to target the email because we want to check that. And then if you're wondering, the context key, this is where our data will be mapped to. So whenever we want to query the response of this fetch, we can refer back to the connectors.http result. So let's click done and then just connect it and click save. So now that we have our connector, let's create a condition block where we check the three different scenarios. So condition, 3 scenarios. The condition name, the first condition is when the user is approved and in the Airtable, right? In this case, what happens? We return is approved true. So our key is going to be the connectors.http result where it's going to be saved. Dot is approved. And then we say is true. So this will check if the is approved response is true. The other condition is if the user isn't in the Airtable. So connectors.http result is approved equals the value add. And then the last scenario is if the user is in our Airtable but isn't approved. So is in Airtable but isn't approved. Done. And then let's connect this to our connector. Okay, so if our user is approved and in the Airtable, we can simply just end the flow. So let's connect to the end. If our user isn't in the Airtable, we want to add the user. So let's create another connector. Save connectors, generic HTTP result again. And let's name this add user to Airtable. Base URL is the same. This time it's the add user API endpoint. Okay, so let's create this. Our connector is there, and then let's go back to our flows. And then in the isn't in our Airtable, let's add our connector. So this time it's a post. And then we simply have the add user, and in our endpoint, again, we can do the double braces user.email because we're going to add that email to our Airtable. Click done. And then we just connect that. And then if the user is in the Airtable but isn't approved, we want to show a waiting screen. So let's create that screen. Screen body, we can say awaiting approval. And then we want to connect this to our waiting screen. But we also want to connect our isn't in the Airtable also to the waiting screen. And so now we are done our flow. So to conclude, you've just learned how to use flows to easily implement screens, authentication, and use connectors to make requests to something like our API. Thank you.